Everyone, Laura Mackey here. Today I thought I'd show you a couple things in Lightroom. One of them is to bring back some lost clouds in an overblown sky. And the other is to work with your transform tool to make sure your verticals are straight. So the first thing that I would like to do, and the first thing I usually do when I'm working on any kind of architecture, is I straighten the verticals. And over here on the right hand side, you'll see these are all of your panels for Lightroom. And the one that you need for this is the Transform tool. So I'm going to click that and expand it. The first thing I always do is I click Auto, just to see, does that fix the verticals? And here it does a pretty darn good job. There are a couple little things that bug me, that it's not completely straight here on the right hand side, and because the right hand side is so close to the straight edge over here, I want to make sure that that side is completely vertical. So the way I do that is down at the bottom it says Show Grid, but you'll notice if I move away from Show Grid, the grid goes away. So I want to see it all the time, just for now. So I'm going to turn that to Always. And you'll see, conveniently enough, there's a line right here where I can see, if I zoom in, that vertical. And it actually lines up with that pretty good. It's not bad. So I don't really think that there isn't a need to change that vertical at all there. In fact, Auto did such a good job, I'm not sure that I need to change it. However, if I look here, this is just slightly off. So I'm going to just show you how you correct it on top of the Auto function. You can come over here to Vertical, and you can slide these sliders individually to tweak the setting that Auto gave you. So I like it just a slight bit, the vertical corrected over here, so that this edge of the barn lines up very straight with the grid. I'm going to back out again so you can see that, and I'm going to zoom in over here just to make sure that all of that looks good. Now this is just slightly off now, but I'm thinking I kind of like it better with a little bit of adjustment on the left hand side. You'll notice too that when I made this adjustment, it tilted the image, so it sort of took some of the image off the canvas area and it left a blank. The way you can correct those blanks is that you just use the scale button and you can just move it to the right until it fills in those areas, which it did. And I want to go beyond that because I see this little thing down here, and I can, instead of cloning, I'm just going to be lazy. I'm going to increase the size so it covers that up too. So that's just a nifty little trick that you can use. Now, when I use the Transform tool, I don't think I've ever used full because full really, I don't know, it just doesn't look right to me. So Auto, and then your adjustments here. Now there's a manual mode here that you can use too. And so I'm going to go back and I'm going to show you that as well. Sometimes I have to use this little manual mode. The Auto maybe doesn't work. Sometimes if there are too many different lines in your image, a building that has balconies and different architectural features, it really doesn't know what it's looking at to make the Auto adjustment. So you can have the option of using these manual adjustments. So I'm going to go ahead and step back in my history, and I'm going to show you how that works. So now I've stepped back and I'm at the beginning again, and you'll see that in the Transform tool this says Off. Well, we're not going to select any of these down here. We're going to actually click this, and if I hover over it, you'll see that it says Guided Upright. So I'm going to click that once, and you'll see it changes into this little icon kind of thing here. And what you can do is you can click and drag along these vertical edges. Click once, and you can do two of them. I'm going to click on that side and this side. And then it will make an adjustment based on that. And you can adjust these, you can tweak these too by clicking and dragging and see if you can get good lines. Now, if I go over here and click this again, it just temporarily turns them off. So you can you can zoom in and pan around to see if you like what it did. I'm going to pan over here, and yeah, that's pretty good, but if I click and click that icon again, it brings up these lines where I can see exactly where. So I'm going to just, if I click one of the ends of the lines and drag, it will then adjust the image based on the alignment of that vertical. And it doesn't take much. You'll see I click and drag, and it's just a touch, and that's all it takes. I'm going to go over here and turn that off again, and I can increase the number of grids by sliding down here beneath the image, sliding this around until I get that line right next to the barn so that I can see it. And I'm going to pan around. This looks pretty good here. And I'm going to go over here and just move this against the line. Now that looks pretty darn good. I think it did a better job than the auto. The only thing is, look how much more space it used than the auto function and the tweaks. Now I can sometimes use the scale to bring it back, and that worked pretty good. Or I can crop it. But I prefer to use the scale button, actually, when I use the transform tool, because I think it's quicker, and it's a lot, you can see that it just, boom, you're done, and you can just adjust it much more easily than a crop. If you further need to crop it, you can do that, but I think that's pretty good. So to get rid of the grid, because now that I'm done with that, I'm going to go back down here and then click this and say auto, because that's kind of the default thing, and I don't need to see it anymore for this. So now the next thing I want to show you is how do you bring back the sky in such a pathetically overblown sky. And normally when I would take a photo like this, I would take two photos because it was in midday, and I would take one exposed for the sky and one exposed for the barn, and I'd blend it in Photoshop because there's no way the camera can take an accurately exposed image for both the sky and the structure, because they are completely different, you know, on the light spectrum there. So, you know, however, you can recover a lot of this with your gradient tool. So I'm going to close the transform tool because I'm done with that now. And I'm going to come up here to the gradient tool and click that once, and then it expands all the functions there in the gradient tool. Now I'm going to come over here and I'm going to click and drag my gradient tool so that it covers the sky. Now one thing about Lightroom is that it's not like Photoshop, where Photoshop can select just the sky and you can apply an effect to just the sky. With Lightroom, you kind of have to fudge it a little bit to get it to work and not include some of this barn, because the gradient tool is affecting everything in this line from here above. But first of all, I want to show you how we can bring back some of these clouds, because there is information there. I can see it. So the first thing I'm going to do is reduce the exposure a little bit. You can see I just came over here and I clicked and dragged this down, this exposure. By the way, when you click and drag your gradient, there may be the last adjustments that you made inside that gradient. And I can see here I have a clarity adjustment. I really want to start with all these things at 0, which means that every single one of these sliders needs to be a diamond in the middle. So in order to get them all in the middle, you double click the word effect, and you'll see now that they are all defaulted to 0. And that's how I want to start, because I don't want to be making changes on top of something else that I'm unaware of. So always double click on the word effect before you start making any adjustments in your gradient. So we're still here with the gradient. We've clicked and dragged it. It's going to affect that area that's shown that was showing in red. And you're going to, first thing I'm going to do is just slightly drag the exposure down because it was overexposed, right? And I do see some clouds there. The next thing, how do we get I want more differentiation between the clouds and the plain sky. one way to do that is to drag your highlights down. Now you don't want to drag them like too far, make it muddy looking, but I like to drag them over a little bit. And also, the other thing you can do is reduce the shadow and increase the white, because the shadows are your clouds, right? And the background to those shadows are the blank or white or sky. So you can do that a little bit to give you that definition. And also, if you drag your contrast to the right, contrast is another thing that will give you that definition between the clouds and the white sky. So maybe the exposure is just a little too low. And I'm going to go ahead and use this dehaze button a little bit. That can also dramatically give you a nice definition, but you don't want to go too crazy with that. If I go way over here, you'll see that it's not bad, but the clouds start looking really very black, and it starts getting halo-y looking. I don't actually mind a lot of that, so I'm going to go ahead and maybe around 35 or so. I like that. And then you can go back here and tweak this. Sometimes, you know, the highlights can be dropped down just a little more. Maybe the shadows are too dark. You know, drag that back. And let me see if I drag the whites over what happens. It's a little too bright, so I'm going to drag those whites down. And if I drag the blacks, let's see what happens. That's okay. It's just a matter of taste. So I think I like that pretty well. And if I go up here to the custom, to the white balance area, you can play with that to see what you like. Do you like it, you know, more on the yellowy side? Do you like it more on the blue side? I like that little bit of blue. In fact, I sort of think it adds drama to the image. So I'm just going to have a hint of that in there. That's good enough. Now that I've adjusted and I like the way the clouds are, I notice, oh, well, the barn is included in this, right? Because we just clicked and dragged the gradient. Now, I have not clicked OK yet on this. I have not closed the gradient tool. I'm still in there. But how do I get it to not affect the barn so much? Well, you know, one way is to click and drag this gradient and position it properly. There are many things that go into the position, the angle of the gradient, and if I wanted to change the angle, I could turn it like this. But I don't want it to change too much because pretty much the horizon is level. You can also click and drag this outer edge, and that is the feathering of your gradient. It says how much it's going to feather in the end of the gradient, and I'm not liking that so much either because it's going even more into the barn. But then again, I don't want to have no feathering, because if I drag this up, you'll see then there's a very hard edge. That doesn't look right either. So this image lends me, it's a dilemma in Lightroom. I wouldn't probably ever do it in Lightroom, and I would open it in Photoshop because it's a problem. You know, it's affecting the barn. You don't really want to do that. But there are little ways around this, or to make it a little better. And this is a new thing in Lightroom, maybe in the last 6 months. It's called range mask. If you've worked with masks in Photoshop, you'll probably get a better grasp of this more quickly. But it's basically you're going to tell Lightroom that you only want Lightroom to affect certain areas of this gradient where you dragged it. So I'm going to go ahead and change this to color. You'll see when I click it once, there's a couple of options. I don't use the luminescent very often, so I'm only going to show you this one. You can play with the other one other time if you like, but if you click the word color, you'll see then there's this little eyedropper that comes up. It's waiting for you to make a selection. You're going to tell Lightroom, I only want the gradient to affect these colors. So I'm going to click that once. And then when I come up here, you'll see there's an eyedropper active. It's now waiting for me to click. I'm going to click, hold, and drag an area. I'm telling Lightroom, those are the colors that I want the gradient to affect. I don't want it to affect anything else. Well, you can see that there are still some colors in here that are inside that square. They're the same colors that I selected inside that square. So you can use the slider down here on the right I'm still in this gradient tool. I'm trying to tweak these colors here that I just selected. If you slide this around, you can see how much it affects, how much of the effect it's going to apply in that gradient tool. So if I go over here all the way to the left, it's basically not using any of that information at all that I just gave it. But you can see that little eyedropper there. It knows that I've made a selection of these colors in this gradient tool. So I'm going to come back over here and move this to the right a little bit. So I think that that's a good compromise. See, it did take away some of the gradient effect of this barn because it knew that none of those colors in this square over here were in this barn, or not a lot of them. Let's just put it that way, because there are always multiple colors in black because black has every color in it. White is a vacancy of all the colors. So in this black area or darker area, there are some of these colors, but not that many. So it took a lot of the effect of the gradient away from this area. So it's a kind of a way to fudge your gradient tool. The proper way is Photoshop, always, for something like this. However, not everybody has it, and it's kind of a nice feature. So I'm going to click Close, and you'll see now that if I go over here to my history, I'm going to go to the part where we added the gradient tool. Where is that? Here we are. Add graduated filter. If I go right before that, that is before we added the gradient, and that is after. What a huge difference, right? And remember that little thing we just did with the range mask? I'm going to show you what it looks like before the range mask. That's before we selected that little square of colors and we said to Lightroom, please only have the graduated filter affect the area where those colors are present. So once we did that, then Lightroom said, oh, okay, I'm only going to affect these colors. So then, voila, much of your barn has been recovered by using that little range mask. It's a very, very handy tool, and I'm really glad Lightroom included something like that in its features, because it's handy for those of you who do not Photoshop. Anyway, I hope that was informative to you, and I hope you'll be able to use that in your images when you create them in Lightroom. Okay, thank you very much for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.